Hello, welcome back to another Pen Talk. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for following me on my journey through the world of pens, and it is a world of pens. You might even call it a galaxy, or a universe. Or if we're into the parallel universes, then we can have a whole discussion about all of those aspects. But let's talk about the pen that we have in front of us. This is a recognizable box. You've seen it recently. If we look at the label, we'll see it's a 601A with a 0.5 nib, which to my understanding, that's 0.5 millimeters, and that would be a fine in the Chinese world of pens. Now, it's definitely Wing Sung labeled. A lot of Chinese there. Recognizable box, as we've discussed in some of the other videos that I've talked about. As we open it up, we'll see an interesting little blue jewel, and we'll slide out everything. And some people have said they don't get the little silicone grease with their pen, but whenever it comes in the box, I've always seen it included. These are the instructions, which I've shown before. This one's not revised to show. It still shows that hooded nib, which is more common in the 601. But it's still informative and nice and made of good paper. It'll survive. And we look at the pen. It's a handsome looking pen. I think it is really a classic design, executed extremely well. It's not a heavy pen. It's more on the light side, but that's okay. Pull off cap, and we see what makes this pen different is the number 5 nib. And there's the F for fine, represented by the sticker with the 0.5 on it. I love these blue jewels. The jewels first started showing up on the 601 when they went to that pump filler and got off the Vacuumatic, and I don't think the Vacuumatic is in production anymore. The blind cap unscrews. It's nice and tight. You can feel and see the seam, but if you don't really look for it, it's easy to just miss it, and it looks like a complete barrel. I thought it was always nice that they used a metal rod here as the plunger, and they've used that from the beginning, and the action is very smooth. If we look closely at that nut, there's a plastic tube that sometimes I got a few of them, and that fits over there, and it allows you to unscrew that, and you can get Vacuumatic or pump replacement bits, which I have some just for that need that may happen in the future. So we're going to compare this to some of the other Wing Sung 601 models, and then we'll find a nice suitable ink for it, ink it up, and see how that number 5 nib writes. Here's some models that we're going to use for comparison. The first one is this nice aqua color, and as you can see, it also has the blue jewel, but if we pull off the cap, we'll see what is typically on these pens, which is a nice hooded nib. It generally writes on the fine side, which is usually like a 0.38 line. And all these pens post well. We'll expose the nib on this one just so we can keep things in perspective. And also visually see how it looks. And we're going to line up the clutch ring so you can get an idea of holding the pen and how that nib might impact where you hold it. This is here just as a visual of that, what I call pump filler. And again, these blind caps take a little bit of effort to take off, and we can see how that works. And generally, 3 pumps will fill the ink almost really up to the top. So that's very, very nice. And if we look at the top of this pen, we'll see a pearl jewel, but still it's a piece of plastic versus here's an original one that has a Vacuumatic in it, and they have just a cone of chrome, same material and color as the cap. We pull this off and we'll see that same hooded nib. It's nice that the color extends. Sometimes you can get them with and without the ink window. If I'm going to get a solid color one, I'm definitely going to get an ink window. Not an option on the transparent one. Kind of a moot point there. And again, if we open up this earlier version, we'll see that same metal thing. And this feels a little different, but it still is a nice return action there. I think they did an excellent job at re-engineering and reinventing a classic design, and I think they've actually improved it in many levels, and here we have it with a normal number 5 nib, which we're going to ink up and see how it writes. I like to compare different pen models, and this is the 601 that I recently reviewed, which I've used a lot recently. That Massachusetts 54 ink in there just writes very, very well. This has that gold finial in it to match the gold trim. This has that blue finial to show that it's a draw filler. Interesting thing is that the metal pen is a little bit longer. It's mostly in the body. Pull off caps, and the caps are interchangeable, so all of these models are very good dimensionally. They all fit together. You can see the difference between them. Again, the length is in the barrel, I think. So that's just how this model can evolve and take on many different forms. So I would be remiss to not show the Jinhao 51A, which comes in a great variety of finishes, including wood. It's basically the same cap on all of these, but let's uncap them and look at the nibs. So Jinhao has done the same variation that Wingsung just started, but Jinhao did it over a year ago, where the number 5 nib is put into here. This pen on top is the least expensive model in the series. I think they're about $2 US, including shipping. And the pen works good, works well. I like the nibs on the hooded nibs better on the Wingsungs, but these are fine hooded nibs and probably equivalent of what was on the original 51A. These two are the wood pens, and I swapped in a 1.1 millimeter stub here just to show you that the number 5 nib gives you that option of a lot of different writing. This is the special Bobby edition, which is the most expensive pen of this group. That has a beautiful custom nib that Bobby has designed and put on these, and I've done a couple reviews on those, and I love them, and I've also given them out. They're great for lefty writers. And obviously here's a version of it with a number 5 nib on it. Interesting way that you can take a classic pen design and just elevate it. The other thing that makes these less expensive is these are all cartridge converter pens, versus the Wingsungs, which are those draw fillers or the original vacuumatic diaphragm fillers. Here we have the 601A, as disassembled as I'm going to do. I've done a lot of reviews on these pens, and there's a nice nut at the top, and I have a number of plastic cylindrical tools that use to take that nut out if you ever have to repair or re-grease that piston in there. The feed is a classic feed with that type of draw filler or vacuumatic filler that has this breather tube. So when you press down on the piston or the diaphragm, it pushes air out this tube. It pulls ink up the tube, and it allows you to fill the ink up to the top of that tube. Works very well. I'll give a link to the review I did where I compared the diaphragm against the piston filler. How much better the piston works than the diaphragm. This is a very ornate nib for a number 5 nib in this type of pen. And this pen is extremely well made. All the parts fit together well. But let's explore this nib, which is a 25 millimeter nib or close to a number 5. Here's some nibs I put together just to show relative size and also tipping material. This is that 32 millimeter or closer to a number 6 nib that's in like the Wingsung 699 and 616. And next to it is the nib that's in the 601A, which is much closer to a number 5 nib. And it is 25 millimeters in total length. Next to it is a nib that maybe I'll put in the pen if I get motivated, is a Knox number 5 with an oblique double broad nib. You can see that tipping material there. And for reference, here's a Jinhao number 5, a very generic nib that's in the 991, 992, and a bunch of other Jinhaos, including the 51A that uses this type of nib. And you can also see that fine tipping material on the larger nib. So it's nice for those of you that don't like the fine nib that's in the hooded version of the 601. You can now get that excellent draw filler with a standard number 5 nib, and you can replace that as you wish. I'm trying out a new macro lens on my video camera. It doesn't have a threaded end to it, so it's not the easiest thing to do. It's not bad. Certainly does show up that tipping material on those nibs, and also shows up that nice design on these nibs. So I'm impressed. Hopefully you like it too. So here's a clear 601 that has that draw filler in it. So you can see how it works. So you just push down, pushes out air, you release, pulls up ink. When I did my first filling of these, it took 3 pumps to basically fill this chamber. And as you can see, there's a lot of ink, and there's that breather tube there. So I think, of all the filling mechanisms, I think this is one of the best. I mentioned there's a tool, and it's just this plastic tool which has a hex at the bottom. So when you put it in here, it fits very well against that nut, and you turn it. I don't remember what direction, but I'm not worried about it. I'm certain it's lefty-loosey, because there's no reason to make the threads any different. So it's easy to replace if you have to. And here's some spare ones that I have. The bottom's the piston filler, and the top one is the diaphragm. You can see right away that the diaphragm's going to take up a lot more space in there, and this is how it works. So each pump, you don't get as much ink drawn up as you would with the piston design. I looked for an ink that I thought would go well with that dark red color of the 601A, so I thought I would give this a shot. In the early days, many years ago, when papier plume became very popular, I ordered about 4 or 5 bottles, and this was one of them. I really haven't used ink much since I got it, and I think it's aged a little bit. It's definitely darker than I remember it. I don't have any samples of what it looked like when I first got it. I could go visit the video review I did, but did I do one? I don't know. I don't remember. But you can see it's a little bit light, a little bit skippy, but it's certainly kind of like a dark red, blood red. I don't know how you would call it, lover's red. The chromatography is very interesting. Seems to be some permanence here at the bottom. A lot of reddish pink, and then at the very top, a very intense yellow. So definitely an interesting ink, and let's see how it works in that Wingsung number 5 fine nib. So now we're ready for that all-important how does it write section of the review. Before we dig into that, I need to provide you with some experiences that I had with this pen. When I filled it, I did the 3 pumps and air came out for the 3 pumps, but then I did a couple more where no air came out, so it really filled up the pen. And I wiped it off, and then when I went to write with it, it blobbed out some ink. So obviously I overfilled it. 3 pumps would have been enough. And when you're done, kind of like Wasky Squirrel shows you, is you should expel a little bit of ink out so you get some air in there to kind of like equilibrate it. The next challenge I had is this nib just did not write as well as the larger Wingsung nib that looks similar to this one. And I do have that in fine and medium, and I really enjoy both of those, the medium one more than the fine, but they are very nice nibs. This gives a lot more feedback. It just doesn't feel as good on paper as the larger nib did, the 32 millimeter one. So I've been writing with it for a while, writing with it on different papers, and it has definitely smoothed out and become a better writer. Still not a great writer, but a better writer. And this pen is just classic in its design, that pull-off cap that posts very deeply and very securely. It fits very nicely in the hand. We'll give you the dimensions of the section, and yes, you may slide down a little bit, but I don't find it that angle to really push my fingers down as much as it does on some other pen designs. And you can hold it anywhere. That clutch ring is, you don't really feel it. So that gives you a lot of flexibility on how you hold this pen. It doesn't force you into one particular location. The pen is on the light side, but then all of these pens are on the light side from my experiences. There's no heavy version of this, either from Parker or another pen maker. Enough talk, let's hear this nib on paper. I think, as you can see, this nib is on the dry side. Drier than I like. And I also think this old ink is also very dry. So that's a bad combination. So what I would do with this is I would do first a little smoothing. I think it also may have a little bit of baby's bottom. So let's do that and see if it improves the writing. So we have this nail board. I buy them on the supermarket for $1. So on the very coarse end, I don't use a lot of pressure. And I do figure eights back and forth. I do a rotation, raise up the angle. And now I'm going to go to the medium side, and you can definitely feel it. And there's also, it seems to already improve the ink flow. And I always do a little bit on the smoothing side, just to make it feel good on the paper. You can see some ink there from the board. And after smoothing, it is a much, much better nib. It's always going to be a little bit on the dry side, but it's certainly not as dry as it was. And like I said, this ink is dry, so I'm happy. And that was just a little bit of smoothing. And I said a lot of times that there isn't a nib I haven't met that could not benefit from a little bit of smoothing. So now we're going to rate the pen. And I'm going to give it an 8.9. And I just give it one check for the innovative use of a number 5 nib in this draw filler, pump filler. The nib is just not up to speed. The building construction is great. We'll give it a check for that. You know, it's a pen that, you know, if you get it, expect the nib, you know, maybe you might like a dry nib. It would certainly work well on copy paper and things like that. But for me, it's not exactly, doesn't exactly hit the sweet spot for me. And I give it an 8.9 because I try to be objective in my ratings and put this in perspective with other pens, and other pens that I've given an 8.9 to are certainly not any worse nor better than this one, so I try to put things in perspective. So we reached the end of this video. Thank you for watching. May you have many great writing experiences and find pens and inks and nibs and papers and everything else that just encourages you to write. Whatever motivates you to write, I strongly encourage you to pursue that. I think writing is very therapeutic, and therapy is a good thing in this challenging times that we live in. Wish you all are safe, healthy, and happy, and finding some pleasure and joy along with the other challenges that we have. So get a pen, put some ink in it, and start writing. If you've reached the end of this video, and you can see again, if I rotate the nib, it's sensitive to angle, so that's why, you know, but I think with a little bit more work, the nib can be better, and these nibs are not all the same because this is a mass-produced item, so your nib might work much better than this one, but I'm reviewing the one that I have. Enough editorial comment. We're going to say bye for now until the next video.